Greetings and welcome to the module on good faith efforts, outreach, and evaluation. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started with this module. The information in this PowerPoint is provided for general information purposes only, and these materials are not intended to provide legal advice. These copyrighted materials may not be reproduced, copied, or used without prior permission from the authors, DCI. For this module, the topics that are going to be covered, the first is goals and benchmarks. We will recap Module F, the utilization and benchmarks, and look at the current year goals framework. Moving into the second topic of action-oriented programs and preparing for those action-oriented programs. The third topic is outreach and recruitment as it relates to good faith efforts. So implementing the good faith efforts and then also showcasing your efforts with two specific examples from OFCCP that they've provided. Our last topic is goal attainment and effectiveness. So evaluation of your goals and the communication to your company. We will provide you with an evaluation example from OFCCP and then a new evaluation example that DCI has just created. So let's begin. The first is goals and benchmarks. We're going to recap Module F and then we're going to move into the current year goal framework. Module F, you learned about the utilization and benchmarks, the 4 protected groups that each have their own goal and benchmark: minorities and females, individuals with disabilities, and then the 4th is protected veterans. This table is a great high-level overview of what was included in that module. On this table, you can see there are numerical goals, so what is the goal for each of those 4 protected groups, how the group is compared to the comparator groups to them, how they're being analyzed by, the typical analysis test, and then of course the outcome. So for example, for minorities and females, both of those groups, the numerical goal is the percentage of females or minorities that's available and qualified based on the availability calculations done every year. This is going to be determined from the self-ID of your females and minorities and from the current workforce total, so your current year roster snapshot. It's going to be, again, analyzed by AAP or FAAP, or Functional Affirmative Action Plan job groups on that specific date snapshot of your AAP plan. And to determine utilization or if a goal needs to be set, for this test, we will use standard deviation for groups of 30 or more, or an exact binomial for groups less than 30. The outcome for minorities and females is an underutilization if it is determined to be statistically different and underutilization is deemed, then you will set your current availability as minimum goal for good faith efforts. For example, if your female availability that year is calculated to be 50%, your current incumbency of females as of the snapshot date of your roster is 25%. We statistically compare 25% to 50%. We do indeed find that there is a statistical difference and we deem underutilization. Then that female availability of 50% would be the new goal for that year moving forward. Individuals with disabilities, the numerical goal is a standardized goal of 7%. This is consistent every affirmative action plan unless changed by OFCCP. Individuals with disabilities are identified by a self-ID, employees with disabilities. Again, this is taken from your current workforce total, so your current year roster as of this snapshot. And this is also looked at and analyzed by AAP or FAAP job groups. The typical analysis test that DCI conducts for this is an ending difference, whereas if any of your job groups fall below the 7%, it is determined that that job group is underutilized for individuals with disability. The new goal is always going to be 7%, so no matter what your current incumbency looks like for individuals with disability self-ID status, if it is underutilized, it will still and it will remain 5 or 7%, excuse me. Protected veterans is calculated from OFCCP and is provided to the OFCCP community on their website each year. Or clients do have the option of using 5 different factors in determining the benchmark. This comparator group is identified from those who have self-ID'd as protected veterans. And in this case, we're using those that are hired within the AAP year. So the 12 months prior to your AAP snapshot date, and all those that are hired and self-ID'd as being a protected veteran. The typical test here is, again, the any difference test. So if any of your hires and its total is less than the OFCCP benchmark, if that's what you choose to use, then we will deem it as being underutilized. And the new veteran goal will be the goal that OFCCP sets forth. So for example, if when we were looking at the past 12 months of veteran hires, if the goal was 5.9% and your total hires that were protected veterans was only 5%, which is still really good, but 5% was less than the 5.9% that previous 12 months, it is deemed underutilized. And then the new goal moving forward for your next 12 months will be the new goal that's looked up on the OFCCP website. It could be lower, it could be higher, it could be the same. So if it is lower, it's 5.7, then the next 12 months moving forward, it would be the 5.7%. One thing to note is outreach and recruitment is required annually for individuals with disabilities and protected veterans, regardless of any utilization results. Now let's look at goals and benchmark the current year goals framework. Placement goals are used to measure progress towards achieving your equal employment opportunity. The general thinking and rationale of the goals focus is for the implementation in your AAP this year going forward. So if a goal is being set for any of those 4 protected groups, and we know that individuals with disability and protected veterans will always have that goal, you're really looking at your good faith efforts, your hiring, your recruitment, your promotions, your transfers within for that 12 months moving forward. You do have the ability to increase your goal. So if going back to the example of the females where there was an availability at 50%, you could raise that and be more aggressive or aspirational to a 60%, but you at least have to, by OCCP regulations, set that at its availability, which would be the 50%. Your goal is going to be used to measure your progress the following AAP year for movements considered in hires, promotions in your rosters. The one thing to remember is that goals are not quotas. So while they do serve as objectives and targets based on the availability percentage, they are not quotas, so they do not justify preferential treatment and they do not create set-asides. We are not able to tie these to selection decisions. And what you really want to do rather than that is focus on increasing the pools and the movements into your job groups that have these goals. Now we're going to take a look at action-oriented programs and the preparation for action-oriented programs. So when you have goals and focus areas, how are we creating these action-oriented programs and what are we doing to prepare ourselves? So action-oriented programs depend upon the nature of the problems or opportunity areas identified through this in-depth analysis of your workforce utilization, personnel activity, compensation, and then really personnel practices, policies, and all your procedures. So after your statistical and written AAPs are available, you really want to get to know your plan. You want to become familiar with the job titles within each job group, what the job groups that have these goals are like compared to last year. So is it a reoccurring goal? Was there the same goal in this job group the prior year? Was progress made through promotions into a new hires the previous year? Did you see any high turnover in that same job group? And what does the incumbency what does the incumbency or self-ID rates look like in this job group? Once a contractor identifies a problem area or opportunity area, it must develop and implement a program to eliminate these problems. And that is where we're going to create the action plan for the upcoming AAP year, known as the action-oriented programs. Here are some questions that you want to ask yourself when creating these action-oriented programs. Who's going to be involved? What are your immediate versus future steps look like? How are you going to train the recruiters, provide recruiter resources and toolkits? Can you identify or create mentorship programs, etc., for internal movements? How will you audit your progress? This is extremely important in a focus area at OFCCP. What does your criteria look like for effectiveness? How are you measuring this? What data do you have to measure your effectiveness and your progress? And then you really want to make sure it's time bound so that you identify when your goal is going to be met by and what you're doing within that time frame. What we like to say and allude to is action-oriented programs must be specific and results-oriented. The specific means describing what action or actions is to be taken, who's responsible for performing the action, and then when will the action be accomplished. Results-oriented means the proper execution of the program will likely lead to an increase in participation of the protected group in the identified problem area. So the action-oriented programs must be described in the AAP and their objectives must be achievable. Examples of the type of programs and initiatives that contractors have found to be effective in addressing these specific utilization problems have included mentoring partnerships, adopted schools, providing trainers and equipment to teach specific schools at vocational or technical schools, and then also internship programs with minority colleges and universities. Don't forget, it's a regulatory requirement that management and other appropriate staff members be made aware of your affirmative action program results, as well as informed of the progress towards these goals throughout the year. So you want to include anyone who makes employment decisions, including, but of course not limited to, hiring, promoting, transferring, terminating, compensation, and/or performance evaluations. And if there's various ways that this communication can be accomplished, such as HR or human resource team attending manager meetings, webinars, online training and communications, email notifications of goals and responsibilities. And then also some applicant tracking systems do allow where you can house goals and there's an option to notify recruiters and managers when specific positions become available. Ideally, what you want to do is develop a tiered communication strategy with some type of accountability built in so that your assured upper level managers, such as regional managers, etc., are going to push that communication to their areas of responsibilities. Two other important items that are not on this slide is time and the affirmative action officer leader. So once you've received the final AAPs from DCI, you want to make plans to disseminate the information in a timely manner for all persons who should be familiar with the program. The longer you hold on to that AAP documents after the plan year, it's going to be more difficult to get the buy-in from your plan owners. So the objective is to get every plan owner and all the managers their goals quickly so that they have the full 10 to 12 months to work on them. The longer you wait, the more opportunities you may miss. And don't forget, what gets measured gets done. It's also important to have a lead person who could hold everyone accountable when items are not received, not appropriately written, and or they're continually out of compliance with your deadlines and other AAP commitments. So again, it's important to have that affirmative action officer leader position or someone assigned to that in your organization. Let's move on now to outreach and recruitment, your good faith efforts. We'll speak a little bit about the implementation and then also on how you can showcase your efforts. So for the outreach and recruitment, after you've determined your goals, you want to implement these action-oriented programs we just spoke about on the prior slide to show your good faith efforts towards goal progression and your affirmative action responsibilities. You want to demonstrate these good faith efforts. You can reach out to women, minorities, individuals with disabilities, and protected veterans. And what we typically say is you want to cast the recruitment net wider. Think of other ways that you can bring in qualified and available individuals into your organization and have them express that interest. Some ideas could be various career fairs, advocacy groups, schools in which desired skill sets are taught, higher education programs for underutilized groups. You also want to make sure you're maintaining job postings and that they're current and accurate. Also, make sure you're thinking of promotional opportunities, training opportunities, transfer opportunities. People are aware of the job postings and these opportunities internally as well. You also want to make sure you're focusing on the goal area and not the percentage. This is extremely important since goals are not quotas and they're not creating set-asides or preferences. It's the more of the focus on the goal area than the actual numbers. In doing this, you also can help bring focus to the maturity of the pipeline. So it may take some time to get an ideal pool and this pipeline built up of those qualified and available applicants. Also, don't forget we just spoke about your internal initiatives and make sure that they are in this pipeline as well and who could become available to be moved, transferred, promoted. Make sure you're building partnerships and relationships with outside individuals, advocacy groups and schools and recruiters. And then also a great area to focus on a great way to focus on the goal area is through ERGs, employee resource groups. They can help out as well, bring awareness and interest to increase in these pipelines and availability for individuals who might be interested. Don't forget you want to maintain records of all good faith efforts, 2 years for minorities and females, and then of course 3 years for individuals with disabilities and veterans. Now let's talk about outreach and recruitment as it relates to showcasing efforts. It is no longer good enough to simply send your job listings to diverse websites. The OFCCP is looking for proof that meaningful contacts have been made with different outreach and recruiting sources. So you want to be mindful of establishing these meaningful and result-oriented outreach and recruitment. Please make sure you include women, minorities, individuals with disability, and protected veterans in this outreach. No one-size-fits-all approach applies to every contractor. What we say here is just make sure that you are including both external and internal focus. This can include calls and visits to agencies such as the VA, Goodwill, rehab services, etc. Teaching interview skills through mock interviews for unemployed or schools with predominant enrollment of a protected group of your interest. Internal diversity celebrations. Lunch and learns regarding affirmative action, equal employment opportunity, or diversity. Advertisements in diverse publications. Or becoming board members of diverse organizations and agencies. We actually have a DCI tool at the end of this module we will present to you, and you can access it through your consultant or our client resources portal. And there is a tab in there that lists numerous resources on what and ideas that you can for reaching out to these 4 protected groups. Let's walk through an example of an action-oriented plan that OFCCP has presented and outlined. So here is a contractor has identified a problem area where they lack utilization for both minorities and females in groups 2A, which is an analyst. When they say lack utilization, it really means that they're underutilized. So a job group 2A, which are analysts, are underutilized for minorities and females, meaning their incumbency is statistically different than their availability. So the contractor has established a goal to increase both minority and female utilization in this job group 2A of analysts. The job group is composed of entry-level analysts and is predominantly filled by external recruitment. So upon identifying the underutilization, the contractor would then analyze placements into the job group to determine whether underutilization was due to recruitment or selection. For this example, the contractor has determined that the problem or area of opportunity is a lack of qualified minority and female applicants. So it's the recruitment rather than the selection. To address the problem, the contractor developed and instituted specific affirmative actions to improve the recruitment of qualified minorities and females. These specific recruitment ideas were such: posting employment advertisements for all positions in any local minority and women's interest media, disseminating information on the job opportunities to organizations specifically representing minorities and women, as well as employment development agencies in general, encouraging all employees to refer qualified minority and female applicants, actively recruiting at secondary schools, junior colleges, and universities with predominantly minority or female enrollments, and conducting targeted recruitment at educational institutions and programs that specialized in the skill sets required for the position of that 2A analyst. The contractor may also want to explore whether there are existing employees in other job groups that could be developed for promotion or transfer and institute appropriate action programs to increase that type of opportunity as well. Step 4, the contractor must remember to periodically review all efforts to ensure that they are effective and then adjust these efforts as necessary. It's okay not to hit the target, but you want to be realistic and honest with yourself as a company if you're consistently not meeting the target and needing to adjust your approach, research, and understanding of the framework and opportunity areas. And then the last step 5 is document all your efforts so they can be assessed in the future and if needed when audited. So really there's nothing worse than having all these efforts and dedicated resources and time and energy, but then the institutional knowledge leaves the company and is not documented anywhere. Let's look at one more OFCCP example of outreach and recruitment. This is an example of high turnover for females. Let's stick with females. So it's a high turnover for females in job group 3B. 3B is a mid-level technician, okay? So this high turnover for females in job group 3B, mid-level technicians, is comprised of technicians 2 and technician 3 positions. Most placements into the job group come from non-competitive promotions out of entry-level job group 3A technicians 1. So technicians 1 are non-competitively promoted into mid-level technicians, which are 2. Employees move from technician 2 after they're non-competitively promoted to a technician 3, which is still in job group 3B, by competitive promotion, and then technician 3 becomes a feeder position for competitive promotions into job group 3C, which is senior technician position. These positions involve management training and are a feeder pool for entry-level management positions. So let me recap real quick. So we have a job group 3A, that's entry-level technician 1. They move career progression non-competitive into job group 3B, which is a technician 2. Technician 2 is competitive into technician 3, which is still job group 3B. Technician 3 is the feeder group and competitive into job group 3C, which is the senior technician position, okay? So identifying that just job group 3B has an unusual high turnover for females, the contractor decided to take various actions, starting with determining the reasons behind the turnover rate and then designing methods to reduce or eliminate it, okay? So step one is the contractor wanted to identify the reasons for the turnover, for the female turnover. They initiated a standard policy of conducting exit interviews that's going to provide them with one best practice method of analyzing turnover. So even these involuntary separations can provide a company with useful information regarding its working environment. So you want to make sure exit interviews are conducted with all outgoing employees, and that's what this contractor has determined would be its best approach. Other useful data regarding turnover came from the company's audit and reporting systems, and that data often can serve to confirm information derived from exit interviews. So for example, if the majority of the 3B females stated in their interviews that they were leaving because it was impossible to get promoted, the company should then look at their personnel activity analysis of all promotions, both within and then out of that job group. So in other words, they want to review both the internal job promotions from that Tech 1 to Tech 3 position, because those are both in the job group 3B, but they also want to look at the promotions out of the job group from Tech 3 to that job group 3C, which is a senior technician. And so this analysis of the personnel activity is an element of the company's audit and reporting system. Similarly, if compensation was raised as an issue, the company's compensation analysis could identify if there was a problem with women being paid less than men in the same positions. So you can see here how, since compensation is part of that company audit and reporting system, they've relied on using the elements in your annual requirements of auditing and reporting to help facilitate an area or an idea of why this female turnover was so high. Step two, after determining the reason for the issue, you want to design specific action steps to remedy the identified problem or area of opportunity. So if the exit interviews and the analysis have determined that the primary reason behind this high female turnover is the belief that these female technicians will not get promoted, some of the options the company can take to remedy the issue can include reviewing the job requirements for promotion to ensure that there's nothing that would impose barriers for females, and implementing appropriate revisions to the requirements as necessary if found that there are barriers for women. Conduct periodic affirmative action and equal opportunity training for all individuals involved in the selection process. Ensure all promotional opportunities are posted and then available to all these qualified employees. You institute both formal and informal development programs to assist employees in identifying and preparing for promotional opportunities, and establish a temporary oversight system for promotions specific to this job group. So again, we've identified high turnover for females. We looked at the reason for the issue in the contractor's company audit and reporting system using personnel activity and also looking at exit interviews. From there, we've now designed specific action steps because the exit interviews have identified a promotional opportunity area of where females don't think they're getting promoted. And the personnel activity and promotions have supported that. And we've identified and introduced specific action steps to remedy the identified problem. So this is an example of an action-oriented program or plan. Step three is to periodically review all your efforts and to ensure they are effective. And we will talk about how to ensure they're effective in the next section, in the next slides. Ideally and required is if you are measuring this effectiveness and it's deemed to not be effective, you want to adjust your efforts as necessary. And last but not least is make sure we're documenting. You want to document all your efforts so they can be assessed in the future, and if needed, they're there for you when they're audited. Let's move now to goal attainment and effectiveness, looking at evaluation and communication, and we have two examples. Evaluate outreach and recruitment to measure progress of goals. So contractors must develop and implement this internal audit and reporting system that we spoke about on the previous slide that's going to periodically measure the effectiveness of your total affirmative action plan. A successful audit and reporting system is going to include monitoring of progress towards your stated goals. Also include routine and periodic reports on the status of your goal attainment, and then also discussion and recognition of actions to improve your progress. So you want to evaluate your outreach and recruitment to determine the effectiveness of your action-oriented programs and progression towards goals. Really what you're doing is you want to know how well are you utilizing your company's time, resources, staffing, budget, and are your collective efforts creating a measurable difference? So effectiveness is really assessing your company's good faith efforts using pre-established criteria. And these criteria are not created or dictated by OFCCP. It's up to you as the contractor to decide and establish what criteria you're going to use to measure effectiveness. It could be related to a number such as hires or a number of applicants or employees participating in a program. It could be training events and outcomes, recruiting event participation, how much of a budget was spent, or looking at the number or different types of quality of hires. The key here is that the criteria is pre-established and there is documentation surrounding a conclusion of this effectiveness criteria for every effort. And so once you have all your effectiveness decided for each effort, so you're going to have all these little efforts, and at the end of the year, you'll need to take all these efforts and look at them from the whole to determine an overall effectiveness towards your action-oriented program goals. And then this overall effectiveness is going to be written into what is called a totality statement. So you please don't invest time and resources into efforts, determine their effectiveness, and then fail to create the totality statement. And we'll show you more on the next slides for establishing criteria, measuring this effectiveness, and then creating a totality statement. Be sure to measure your goal attainment by looking at the placement of hires and promotions for both minorities and female. And you should be formally reviewing at least 2 times a year, annually, and then at your mid-year AAP mark. Also, don't forget the importance of communication and showcasing your company's hard work and focus on reaching these goals. So sending out frequent communication internally with updates and progress made. You want to recognize teams and departments for their positive efforts. Just be sure to understand how you want these messages and communications crafted. You don't want to share the exact goal percentage and risk it being interpreted as a quota or just the focus for the goal itself. So here is an example of measuring effectiveness from OFCCP. And what they have here in the middle of the slide is a template. On the far left is the outreach and recruitment activity, the date of the activity, description of the activity, and the evaluation. The criteria for evaluation, what they've pre-established to measure this effectiveness is at the bottom, those 3 items. Did the activity attract qualified applicants who are protected veterans? Did the activity result in the hiring of protected veterans? Did the activity expand contractors' outreach to protected veterans in the community? So for each one of these 3 activities above, they will evaluate based on those 3 factors in the very far right. Don't forget, you want to include both internal and external activities. We say this and emphasize this because a lot of companies and contractors are doing great things both internally and externally, but sometimes they fail to include the internal aspect as well. Something that DCI does provide in your affirmative action plan that also helps evaluate is at the bottom here. This is what we call your 44K data collections analysis, in which the regulations say that you will document the following computations or comparisons, pertaining to both applicants and hires on an annual basis. So they're looking at the total number of job openings in the number of jobs filled, number of applicants hired that are veteran, number of applicants who self-ID as veteran, number of applicants who self-ID as individuals with disability, and then the number of applicants who are hired that have individuals with disability. So this is a slide that showcases DCI's tool, which is an Excel workbook, and it's designed to assist contractors in monitoring and reporting on the results of the evaluation of your effectiveness of outreach and recruitment efforts. So this is going to ensure you have proper tracking of your outreach, and it includes an activity details section, where you can identify again that recruitment or outreach example, both internal and external, the date, some very brief descriptions about it. And then right below that in the middle is called evaluation criteria. This is a snapshot of some pre-established criteria that DCI has presented. If you like this, you can also design your own. And you can see where we're asking specific questions that would gain some insight into whether or not that outreach and recruitment activity was beneficial, or what we call here effective. When all of these activities in this template is filled in, you can go through to the total effectiveness column on the far right and look at that. And after looking at all the individual pieces, what we want you to do is come up with that overall effectiveness, what's called a totality statement. And at the very bottom, there's a square, and it says client has reviewed all outreach effort. This is an example of a totality statement that you're going to want to create and have documented each year. So this DCI template here is a great example of recording your outreach and recruitment activities, having that pre-established evaluation criteria for effectiveness, and then being able to use that to create with this totality statement. You might want to consider creating a template log such as this, or using this if you want to go in the DCI client portal and grabbing this, and then if possible, requiring it to be turned into an affirmative action administrator for review and approval, maybe on a quarterly basis. And then this way you do know it's getting tracked and documented. And again, just one more time to reemphasize that make sure you're tracking good faith efforts and outreach for both internal and external activities, especially if they're currently happening. You want to make sure you're getting credit for those. And that concludes our module on good faith efforts, outreach, and evaluation. Love for you to please visit the client portal to see what topics will be covered in each of these other modules. And we want to thank you for participating. If you have any questions, we would love to review and provide you with this response. We do ask, though, that you direct those questions to our email, info, I-N-F-O, at DCIconsult.com.